Hey everyone, time for our last video for this week, and just to let you all know, I did definitely record all of these all in a row. I'm not wearing the same shirt um, multiple days in a row to record these. I just decided to record all of these in bulk so that I would already have this done so I could get it to you in a good time. So let's go ahead and talk a little bit about Anton Chekhov's The Lady with the Dog. Let's talk a little bit about Chekhov, and then we'll do a short analysis of this work. This will probably be a shorter video than we've done so far, but I just want to go over the basics here. So, first of all, when it came to Chekhov, his goal with writing was to point out how bad and dreary people's lives were, so that they could create better lives for themselves. Part of the way that he approached this goal was by using realism. His works, as well as the messages behind them and the plots, though, they all depend on perspective. So, for example, in The Lady with the Dog, there's no judgment, good or bad, that's cast on the characters who are having the affair. He tells a story, he doesn't comment on it, and he lets the reader decide how they should look at it. According to the book, the perspective that has come to be called Chekhovian, it's usually characterized by understatement and concealed meaning, scenes of autumn and twilight when things are winding down rather than starting up, and prematurely aging heroes who hope for very little and don't know what they want, or perhaps don't even really know what they think they want. This is what the Chekhovian style is. So I'm not going to go over what happens in the work. It's straightforward. You've read it. You know what happens. So I'm not going to give a summary or anything. But I do want to do a bit of discussion about what the work means. So first and foremost, although this is a work that could be described about or as a story about the abrupt and awesome power of passionate love, it ultimately seems to be preoccupied more by other mundane matters, and perhaps the abrupt ending that we get is meant to inspire questions rather than answering them. So, for example, it could be asking if love can be seen as something that can help people escape from the mundane, everyday life that can be so boring. Or is it simply more of the same thing disguised as something passionate and important? Chekhov seems to want to refuse to give us a direct answer and leaves us to mull over this by ourselves. A thing to note immediately about our main character, Dmitri, is that he is bored with his life. Nothing interests him much. He hates his wife, and the only thing that really excites him is something new and unusual, Anna. He is a very cynical character who lives in the kind of world that Chekhov wanted to expose his readers to. You can see an example of his cynicism at the beginning of page 897. So, another thing is that although this work is steeped in realism, there are romantic lines peppered throughout, and we have to ask ourselves, are these meant to be taken literally or ironically? And it all comes down to that question that we asked earlier. Is love something that can take away from the mundanity of life, or does it merely disguise it while ultimately adding to it? Again, we aren't given a clear answer and are left with more questions than are actually answered. Notice also that this is an older man who has become disillusioned with his life, and one of the things that attracts him to Anna is her youth and her happiness, things that remind him of his daughter. This is a man who has had many love affairs with older women, and none of them intrigued him or kept his attention for long. We have to wonder if this will be the same with his relationship with Anna, or if it will truly be different since she is so young and naive. Also, it's important to note that this story takes place in and out of Yalta, and this dual setting plays a big role in the work. Yalta is a vacation spot, and it's somewhere that is romantic. It is a place where things are not supposed to happen, and or not proper are actually allowed to happen. So you can notice the shift in the atmosphere and mood when they leave Yalta. Out of it, they are confined in their marriages. While they're there, they can be free together. In a way, we can see outside of Yalta real life as realism, or even as the type of mundane life Chekhov wrote about. And Yalta, as a vacation spot, it can be seen as romanticism, or the type of life people could have if they threw out the constraints of their mundane, boring everyday lives. An example of the romance in Yalta can be seen in the, quote, chirrup of the grasshoppers, unquote, and the smell of the sea. Also, we get to see how, quote, they walked and talked of the strange light on the sea, the water was of a soft warm lilac hue, and there was the golden streak from the moon upon it. They talked of how sultry it was after a hot day." Unquote. In contrast, see how cold and dark it is in Moscow in its winter routine. At his home, he is lonely and isolated, but in Yalta he can have the life that he longs for. Again, this work has an omniscient third-person narrator who refrains from making moral judgment and instead just tells the story as it is and has an attitude deeply devoid of condemnation. It's also important to note that Chekhov doesn't waste words in this work. He says what he wants and is economical with his writing. It's very straightforward, so that when we find passages that are more lengthy or romantic, we know that they are offering a stark contrast to Chekhov's usual writing style, so they are important. Again, though, the message here is unclear to us. Is he saying that living in a vacation world of affairs is preferable to living a mundane life, or will that fantasy world eventually become as mundane as the world these characters are striving to leave behind? Let's talk a minute about Anna. So Anna is so important in this work that it is named after her, or at least after how Gurov first knows her, as the lady with the dog. One of her main parts in this work is to show another perspective, opposite to our main characters, of another bland and boring life. But she also is key to Gurov's transformation in the way that he sees her. And I don't think I mentioned this earlier, but his name is Dmitry Gurov. So when I talk about Dmitry and Gurov, they're the same person. Most of you probably know that if you read it, but I just wanted to clarify to avoid any confusion. But she's also key to his transformation in the way that he sees her, as she shifts from just another conquest to the love of his life. Sorry, I accidentally stopped recording there, so I had to start a new video. She exemplifies in many ways his development as a character, from someone who is bored and tired of his home life and even the affairs that he regularly has, to someone who enjoys life again and is rejuvenated by his time with her. Also, there's something that I do want you to note about the ending. We've already talked about how this text leaves us with more questions than it answers, but it's also important to see that it shows realism in the extreme. The story doesn't follow a traditional plot structure. Instead, it imitates real life in the way that things sometimes just happen. Real life doesn't read like a story. Also, by leaving the story essentially unfinished, Chekhov is leaving the future of the characters up in the air. Just like in real life, people don't always get a satisfying or even a happy ending. We can see this in the way that his conclusion says it is just the beginning. Quote, "It was clear to both of them that they still had a long, long road before them, and that the most complicated and difficult part of it was only just beginning." So, that's about it for this work. Just think about those things as you consider this work. We will, I think the next thing that we're going to be reading is The Yellow Wallpaper, which is one of my absolute favorite works to teach. I didn't necessarily have to even include it in the curriculum, but I love teaching it so much that I did anyway. So make sure you get to reading that over the weekend, and I will connect with you guys over the next few days and into next week as well. And thank you guys. Bye.